This lecture looks at Kant and the civil constitution and deals with an aspect of governance that can impact on how society in general may be governed through strategic leadership. Indeed, it identifies a specific mode of behaviour and self-restraint that would benefit society in general if all adhered to the principles outlined. Initially, this lecture explains the notion of deontology, which incorporates doing one's duty. In Greek, deon means duty, and argues that as opposed to teleology, telos means goal, or that the outcome is an imperative, ends alone do not justify the means. Then this lecture assesses Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative and how this may determine notions of governance. The following or next lecture on Kant explores how such an idea as the categorical imperative may be transposed in a social context and provide governance for the population in general. Both the individual and social or community levels require leadership strategies and governance structures relating to national, supranational and international organisations, e.g. the League of Nations, United Nations and European Union. Deontologists argue that a person must refrain from doing what is known to be wrong, which may be seen as refraining from flouting rules, breaking laws, overstepping limitations or undermining norms. Overall, one must refrain from contradicting deontological constraints. These are rules, norms, laws, limitations. Fundamentally, a deontological perspective requires that people refrain from wrongdoing, even though the result may be good or result in less harm. It's not the consequences of a lie or lying that makes it wrong to lie, but the fact that lies are wrong in themselves. They are wrong because of what they are, even if they can predict good consequences. Furthermore, a deontological perspective is not based on the welfare of others. Harming one individual for the good of 10 is teleological. It's the outcome that is important. However, it is one's duty to inflict harm on no one. Deontologists maintain that no matter what the situation, we are not permitted to violate deontological constraints. We are forbidden to harm an innocent person to decrease the number of deaths, as we are forbidden to harm the one to decrease the number of wrongful killings by agents whose motivations and characters are no worse than ours. Avoiding wrongdoing does not translate into an obligation to minimize the wrongdoing of others. Indeed, the preservation of one's own virtue outweighs both the preservation of the lives of others and their virtue. Lives may not be saved with a lie, even though the lie would prevent the loss of life by deceiving someone that intends to take the lives of innocent victims. Deontological constraints are usually negatively formulated, e.g. don't lie or don't harm the innocent, and the positive formulas such as tell the truth or assist those in need do not automatically become equivalents. For instance, lying and failing to tell the truth are not the same type of acts. Acts that are deemed wrong are what deontologists are interested in, so they see lying as wrong but say nothing about failing to make the truth known. Consequently, lying is wrong while withholding the truth is permissible, even though someone may be harmed by not being party to required information. This is because withholding a truth is not lying. Furthermore, the constraints are narrowly framed, which undermines different interpretations and understanding of the scope of constraints and what constitutes different kinds of acts. Finally, deontological constraints are narrowly directed. That means they are attached to narrow decisions and the actions of individuals rather than the range of potential consequences. Indeed, the narrow directed aspect is usually clarified through an explanation of the difference between intention and foresight, and we only violate the deontological constraint if we intentionally harm another. If we simply choose not to take action to prevent harm from befalling others, or if they are harmed as a consequence but not the chosen end of our action, the action does not violate the deontological constraint against harming the innocent. Fundamentally, in the deontological context, we are not as responsible for the foreseen consequences as we are for our intentions. In his categorical imperative, Kant argued that duty and obligation should bind humanity. His philosophy is deontological, in which the basis of good is goodwill. Indeed, the only thing that can possibly be conceived in the world which can be called good without qualification is a goodwill. Fundamentally, goodness is not dependent on results, but by virtue of it being good. Goodwill is fostered by human beings through people acting rationally in accordance with principles laid down by the categorical imperative. Kant identified the difference between hypothetical and categorical imperatives. Hypothetical imperatives are based on if. If you want to do A, do B. Such imperatives define what we should do to reach some end. Categorical imperatives do not depend on a particular end. They are ends in themselves. They are moral duties. A categorical imperative is one that a fully rational agent would follow. In this context, Kant sets up three formulas. First, act only on a maxim or principle that through your will you would have as a universal law of nature. Secondly, act in such a way as to treat people as means and not only ends. Finally, only do something if you're prepared for everyone else to be able to do it as well. According to Kant, the highest aspiration of human beings is the development of goodwill, which is developed by acting rationally in accordance with the principles of the categorical imperative. Indeed, moral duties are categorical because they should be followed simply because they are duties and for no other reason. The only answer to the question, why should one do their duty, is because it is one's duty. If another answer existed, the imperative would become hypothetical. For Kant, moral norms could not be based on empiricism. Experience identifies different types of conduct and negates the possibility of constructing an overarching morality, a universal law. Moral standards should never be subject to necessity. They are universal and absolute. In this context, Kant challenges the Machiavellian notion of expedient lying and making false promises. Enlightenment emphasized rationality, and Kant argued that each individual had the power of autonomy. Consequently, each had the right and responsibility to be self-governing, and each person's dignity was inalienable. Treat others as ends, not simply as means. Finally, Kant considered that in tyranny some are favoured and others not, and this negates the categorical imperative. One must only do what he or she is prepared for everyone else to do as well. Public law must serve everyone. Just governance necessitates some form of accountability. The categorical imperative does not distinguish between public and private realms. What one does alone or in private is not morally different to what one does in public. In either a public or private domains may we violate the respect owed to others. There is no notion of private morality that competes with public. They are one and the same. If in one's private life one is egotistical and self-centered, one resides in an ethical state of nature, a state of lawlessness, external to morality. Whereas Machiavelli allows a distinction between the two, that is the public and private realms, Immanuel Kant does not. Kant clearly distinguishes between the public and private elements of law. To adhere to law in the public domain, one only need be concerned with judicial obligations. Indeed, civil authorities can coerce individuals to obey the law. However, it is difficult, if not impossible, to legislate or enforce the reasons why a person obeys the law. This is why the moral basis of a just corporate governance procedures or any governance procedures needs to be accepted by the community, corporate or corporation in general. Only when the perceivable actualities of governance procedures are identified will a framework be accepted or completely adhered to. Developing the argument outlined in the Machiavelli lecture regarding President Clinton and his affair with Monica Lewinsky, the question here becomes, did the President do his duty? Did the President act with goodwill? Did the President act rationally in accordance with the principles of the categorical imperative? One of his cabinet charged him with not providing the US with moral leadership, that he had not done his duty. She attacked his argument that policy and programs outcomes were more important than moral leadership. However, the President did consider that moral leadership was important. He argued it is more important to be a good person than a good president, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to atone for this. The problem for President Clinton is that the categorical imperative does not really distinguish between the public and private realms, as we noted in the last slide. What one does in private may not be morally different in public. If one is egotistical and self-centered, then one resides beyond the social pale. However, can atonement overcome immorality and lying? Kant is perplexed by this and eventually reverts to religion. President Clinton does something very similar and considers that God can change us and make us strong at the broken places. Clinton argues that by admitting that he had been wrong, losing faith, starting all over again, and saying I'm sorry, God will search me and know my heart. Indeed, can one be forgiven? Can one be forgiven for breaking the rules of the categorical imperative? Kant returns to God, so does President Clinton. For Kant, the categorical imperative was based in the very notion of enlightenment, which meant the liberation from prejudices and the authorities, and incorporated a purifying event which was realized through critical thinking and critique. Enlightenment involved a new way of thinking. Enlightenment needed human beings to mature and have confidence in one's own understanding without the guidance of others. Pre-Enlightenment, humanity lacked the courage of its convictions, and even though some people had the courage to stand by their own understanding or interpretation, others did not. People are lazy, and even when freed from guidance, remain immature for life. Revolution can change an autocratic regime into one that is democratic. However, a revolution is unable to bring about changes in the way people think. Similar ideas to the previous regime will take the place of those that controlled the unthinking masses, e.g., see the French, the English or the Russian revolutions for examples of this.